The airport lights glowed softly against the early morning sky. The sound of rolling luggage, distant announcements, and the hum of engines filled the air. In the middle of that quiet rush stood a man in uniform, adjusting his pilot cap and taking a deep breath before walking toward the terminal. His name was Daniel, a man who had spent more than 20 years flying above the clouds. Flying was everything to him. It was where he felt alive, peaceful, and free. Yet behind his calm face was a heart weighed down by loneliness. His job had taken him to dozens of countries and thousands of skies, but it had also taken him away from home. His wife and little boy lived in another city because of his changing schedules. Weeks could pass before he saw them. He tried to make up for it with phone calls and video chats, but it was never the same. His son's voice had changed a little each time they spoke, and that made his heart ache more than he liked to admit. Every morning started the same way. He would wake before sunrise, make a cup of coffee that he often left half-finished, and stare at the sky from his kitchen window. The world was quiet at that hour, and he liked that silence. It helped him gather his thoughts before another long day of flying. People always imagined pilots living exciting lives, but for Daniel it had become routine. The same flight paths, the same hotels, the same polite smiles to passengers as they boarded. Sometimes he wondered if he had missed the meaning of it all. Still, when he stepped into the cockpit, everything else faded away. The switches, the lights, the sound of the engine starting, it always gave him a strange kind of comfort. The sky was where he belonged. On this particular morning, his flight was a long one, a full international route that would take him over the ocean. He didn't know it yet, but this journey would change his life forever. Before takeoff, Daniel went through the usual checklist with his co-pilot. They reviewed every system, every control. He was known among his colleagues for his calm and disciplined manner. Even in tough situations, he never lost his composure. It was part of what made people trust him so deeply. The crew respected him, the passengers adored him, and the airline relied on him more than he realized. As he walked down the aisle before departure, checking on passengers and greeting a few with a warm smile, he noticed a young mother helping her daughter fasten her seatbelt. The little girl looked up and smiled brightly, clutching a small toy airplane in her hand. "Are you the pilot?" she asked in a soft, curious voice. Daniel smiled and nodded. "Yes, I am," he said kindly. "And I promise we'll have a smooth and safe flight." The little girl giggled and said, "I love airplanes. I want to be a pilot too." Her mother thanked him quietly, and Daniel moved on. But the child's smile stayed in his mind longer than he expected. Once the plane took off, the world below became smaller and smaller, until it disappeared completely under the clouds. Daniel loved that moment, the silence just before reaching cruising altitude when everything seemed to pause. Up there, it always felt like time stopped. But even in that peaceful space, his thoughts wandered home. He thought of his son's drawings pinned on the refrigerator, of his wife's tired voice after another day alone. He promised himself that after this flight he would take some time off. He needed to be there for them, not just as a voice on the phone, but as a husband and father. The hours passed quietly. Passengers watched movies, read books, or slept. The little girl with the toy airplane had her head resting on her mother's shoulder. Daniel looked over the instrument panel, checking everything carefully, though he could almost do it with his eyes closed after all these years. The clouds outside glowed gold as the sun began to set behind them. He thought about how many sunsets he had seen from above the world, and how none of them ever looked the same. But what he didn't know was that somewhere in that same plane, life was quietly setting up a story that neither he nor anyone else could have predicted. A light beep broke the silence in the cockpit. A small alert flickered on the dashboard, something minor, but Daniel's instincts sharpened immediately. He checked the readings, nothing serious, just a fluctuation in one of the sensors. Still, his focus deepened. A good pilot never ignored even the smallest detail. He made a note to have it checked after landing. For now, everything continued smoothly. His co-pilot chatted about family plans and upcoming leave days, but Daniel mostly nodded and smiled without saying much. He was lost in his thoughts again. He imagined surprising his son at school, watching him run into his arms. Maybe they could go fishing or just have dinner together without screens or schedules in the way. It sounded so simple, yet so out of reach. That thought made him sigh quietly. He didn't realize that life was already preparing a moment that would soon remind him just how precious time really was. A few hours into the flight, As the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers slept, Daniel felt a strange sense of peace. The stars stretched endlessly outside the cockpit window. He had always believed that flying wasn't just about reaching destinations. It was about trust. People trusted him with their lives every time he took control of an aircraft, and he took that responsibility to heart. What he didn't expect was that soon, he would be the one needing that same trust from the world, from fate, and from a little girl whose path had quietly crossed his own. The radio crackled softly with a message from air traffic control, confirming their route ahead. Everything looked clear. Daniel smiled slightly, feeling that familiar rhythm of routine. Yet deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was waiting to happen. It wasn't fear. It was intuition, that quiet voice that sometimes speaks before the storm. When the flight finally neared its destination, Daniel began preparing for descent. He made his usual announcement, his voice steady and warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for arrival. We hope you had a comfortable journey." The passengers stirred, adjusting their seats, collecting their belongings. The little girl looked out the window with excitement, whispering to her mother, "We're almost there." As the plane descended smoothly through the clouds, Daniel focused fully on the controls. Every landing was a reminder of how fragile and beautiful life could be. Thousands of feet up, and yet everything depended on calm hands and clear judgment. When the wheels finally touched the runway and the brakes slowed the massive aircraft to a gentle stop, he let out a small breath of relief. Another safe journey. After parking the plane and completing post-flight checks, Daniel stood by the cockpit door as passengers exited. Some thanked him politely, others smiled and waved. The little girl stopped again before leaving and handed him her tiny toy airplane. "You can keep it," she said proudly. "You're my favorite pilot." Daniel smiled and gently placed the toy in his pocket. "Thank you, young lady," he said softly. "That means a lot." When the passengers were gone and the cabin quieted down, Daniel sat for a moment in the cockpit, staring at the small toy airplane in his hand. Something about it touched him deeply. Maybe it reminded him of his son, or maybe it was the innocence behind that gesture. He didn't know then that this small act of kindness was the start of something far greater, a miracle that neither of them could have seen coming. As he left the airport that evening, the air was cool and still. He looked up at the stars scattered across the dark sky. To him, they weren't just distant lights. They were stories, millions of them, shining over people who didn't even know how closely their lives were connected. Somewhere out there, a chain of events had just begun, one that would soon change not only his world, but the meaning of everything he thought he knew about life, destiny and miracles. The day after the flight, Daniel felt something different inside him. It wasn't just relief from a successful journey, but a strange sense that the day had meant something more. He couldn't forget the little girl's bright smile and how she had handed him that toy airplane before leaving. It was such a simple gesture, yet it touched something deep in his heart. That night, he placed the small toy on his desk beside a framed photo of his family. Somehow it made the room feel warmer. He had a few days off before his next flight. He called his wife and told her he was planning to visit soon. She sounded happy but cautious. After so many broken promises, she wasn't sure if he'd really come this time. "I mean it," he said softly. "I'm coming home next week." His son shouted in the background, "Dad, don't forget to bring me one of those pilot pins." Daniel laughed and promised he would. For the first time in a long while, he was truly looking forward to going home. A week passed quickly, and before he knew it, he was back at the airport, preparing for another flight, this time to a nearby city. It was supposed to be a routine journey, just 3 hours in the air. The weather was clear, the passengers were calm, and everything seemed normal. The same crew was flying with him, and everyone was in good spirits. As the plane climbed through the sky, Daniel took a moment to look outside. The sunlight reflected off the ocean below, creating a trail of shimmering gold. Flying still amazed him even after 2 decades. Every cloud looked like a dream waiting to be touched. But as peaceful as it seemed, the sky could change in seconds. And that day, it did. An hour into the flight, the aircraft suddenly shook. It wasn't violent, but enough to make Daniel glance. At his instruments, the turbulence warning flashed. He calmly informed the passengers to fasten their seatbelts and guided the plane into a stable altitude. His co-pilot looked at him and said, "Looks like a small storm ahead. Should we reroute?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, let's go around it." They adjusted the path slightly, but within minutes dark clouds began to gather faster than expected. The sky outside turned gray, and lightning flashed in the distance. Rain battered the windshield. Daniel's hands moved quickly over the controls. The passengers in the cabin could feel the aircraft sway, but his voice came through the intercom steady and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We're passing through a bit of rough weather. It will be over soon." His calm tone worked like magic. People took deep breaths and trusted him completely. In the middle of the storm, Daniel's focus sharpened. Flying through turbulence wasn't new to him, but this one was unusually strong. He guided the aircraft with patience, waiting for the winds to settle. For a few moments, everything seemed under control. Then, without warning, the right engine indicator flashed red. The co-pilot's eyes widened. "We're losing pressure in engine 2, he shouted. Daniel's hands tightened on the controls. "Stay calm," he said firmly. "We'll handle it." The engine began to sputter, and a low rumble echoed through the plane. The passengers gasped as the aircraft dropped slightly before Daniel stabilized it. He immediately radioed the control tower, declaring an emergency. "This is Flight 217 requesting immediate landing clearance. We have an engine failure and are preparing for emergency descent." The control tower responded quickly, guiding him toward the nearest regional airport. Inside the cabin, fear began to spread. Some passengers held hands, others whispered prayers. The young mother with the little girl was there again, sitting a few rows behind the wing. She hugged her daughter tightly. The child, frightened but brave, whispered, "It's okay, Mommy, the pilot will keep us safe. He promised." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, trusting those words. In the cockpit, Daniel's concentration was absolute. He could feel his heart pounding, but his voice never wavered. "We'll be fine," he told his co-pilot. "Keep monitoring the systems." He had trained for moments like this countless times, but real emergencies always tested a person's true strength. Every decision had to be perfect. Every second mattered. As the plane descended through thick clouds, visibility dropped to almost nothing. The rain sounded like thousands of small stones hitting the fuselage. Daniel could barely see the runway lights through the mist. His co-pilot said, "Landing gear's not responding." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Try manual override." Nothing happened. The landing gear was stuck. They would have to land the plane without it. He quickly explained the situation to the control tower and to the passengers. "We're making an emergency landing," he announced calmly. "Please stay seated and brace for impact. Our crew is fully prepared and will do everything to keep you safe." His voice didn't shake once. Even though fear filled the cabin, his confidence gave everyone a small sense of hope. The plane approached the ground fast. Daniel guided it toward a grassy field near the runway, knowing it was the safest option if the landing gear failed. The engines roared, the rain poured, and the passengers clutched their seats. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then the plane hit the ground hard, sliding across the wet grass. Sparks flew from underneath as metal scraped against earth. The aircraft tilted but didn't break apart. Daniel pulled every bit of control he had left, keeping it steady until it finally slowed and came to a halt. For a few seconds, there was total silence. Then cries of relief filled the air. People began clapping, sobbing, and thanking God. Daniel leaned back in his seat, his hands trembling slightly for the first time. He looked at his co-pilot, who was shaking his head in disbelief. "You did it, Captain," he whispered. "You really did it." Emergency teams rushed toward the aircraft. Within minutes, everyone was safely evacuated. Not one life was lost. The news spread quickly across the country. Pilot saves 142 lives in miraculous landing. Cameras, reporters, and rescue workers surrounded the field. Daniel stayed quiet through it all, refusing to take credit. He simply said, "We did what we were trained to do. The passenger's safety comes first." Later that night, sitting alone in a small hospital room where they had checked him for injuries, Daniel stared at his reflection in the window. His hand still shook faintly. He thought about how close they had come to disaster, how fragile life really was. The toy airplane the little girl had given him was still in his pocket. He pulled it out and placed it on the windowsill. Somehow it felt like a reminder, maybe even a sign. The airline praised him, calling him a hero. Letters poured in from families thanking him for saving their loved ones. But Daniel didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a man doing his job, though deep inside something had changed. The experience had opened a quiet space in his heart, a space filled with gratitude, humility, and an unspoken connection to those passengers he had saved, especially the brave little girl who had believed in him. That night, before going to bed, he whispered to himself, "Life gave me another chance up there. Maybe I need to make it count down here." He didn't know how, but he felt certain that this wasn't the end of the story. Something bigger was still waiting ahead, something that would test his strength once again, but this time not in the sky. After the emergency landing, Daniel became a name everyone talked about. Newspapers called him a hero. Television channels showed clips of passengers hugging him, and people from all over sent letters of gratitude. But fame was never something he cared about. When reporters asked how he managed to stay calm through the crisis, he simply said, "It was teamwork and faith." Inside, he was just thankful everyone survived. For a few weeks, life slowed down. The airline gave him leave to rest and recover. At home, he spent quiet days with his wife and son, trying to enjoy the simple things he had missed. Breakfast together, walks in the park, laughter during dinner. For once, he felt grounded in more ways than one. But even in those peaceful moments, something inside him didn't feel quite right. He would wake up in the middle of the night sweating and breathless, as if reliving the turbulence in his sleep. His wife would comfort him, whispering, "It's over now. You're safe." But the unease stayed. One evening, while sorting through a pile of letters, Daniel came across a small envelope addressed in a child's handwriting. It was from the little girl, Mia, the same child who had given him the toy airplane and been on both flights. Inside was a drawing of a big airplane with wings spread wide and a smiling pilot waving from the cockpit. At the bottom she had written, "Thank you for keeping us safe. You are my favorite pilot." He smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. There was also a short note from her mother, explaining that Mia was recovering from a rare heart condition and had to travel often for treatment. She thanked him again for saving their lives and said her daughter still talked about that day every single morning. Daniel placed the drawing on his desk beside the toy plane. It reminded him of how fragile life could be, and how one person's courage could make a difference. But what he didn't realize was that fate was about to test his own life in ways he could never imagine. Months passed. Daniel slowly returned to work, though something about him had changed. He smiled more often at passengers, spoke kindly to his crew, and took extra care with every flight. But his body was giving quiet warnings. He started feeling tired more easily. A simple climb up the stairs left him breathless. Sometimes his heart raced without reason and he'd have to sit down until it passed. He told himself it was stress and exhaustion, but deep down he knew it was more than that. During a routine medical checkup required for pilots, the doctor frowned at his test results. "You've got an irregular heartbeat," he said. "We'll need to run some further tests." Daniel tried to brush it off, but the results came back serious. His heart was weakening. Years of long hours, pressure, and travel had taken their toll. The doctor told him he needed immediate treatment and might have to stop flying until his condition improved. The news hit him harder than any turbulence ever could. Flying was his life. The idea of being grounded felt like losing a part of himself. That evening he sat in silence, staring at the sky from his window, watching planes pass overhead. His wife put her hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Maybe this is life's way of slowing you down." He nodded, but tears filled his eyes. He didn't know what his future would look like without the sky. Weeks turned into months. His condition worsened despite treatment. The doctors told him he would eventually need a heart transplant. Without it, he might not have long. The words echoed in his mind like the sound of engines fading away. He felt fragile, powerless, so different from the man who once controlled hundreds of tons of metal through storms. One cold evening, his wife sat beside his hospital bed, holding his hand. He was pale, his breathing shallow. "You saved so many lives," she whispered. "Now it's your turn to be saved." He smiled weakly. "I'm just tired," he said softly. "But I'll keep fighting." Every day became a waiting game. The doctor searched for a matching donor, but time was running out. Sometimes he would close his eyes and imagine himself flying again, seeing the world from above, feeling the weightlessness he missed so much. In those dreams, he could hear a child's voice saying, "You'll be okay, Captain. He didn't know why, but it always sounded like Mia. Then one evening, as rain pattered softly against the hospital windows, a nurse rushed into the room with tears in her eyes. "We found a heart," she said breathlessly. "A match just came in." Daniel and his wife looked at each other in shock. Relief washed over them like a wave. It felt like a miracle, an answer to every silent prayer. The doctors prepared him for surgery immediately. As they wheeled him into the operating room, Daniel squeezed his wife's hand and whispered, "If I don't make it, tell our son I'm proud of him." She shook her head firmly. "You will make it," she said. "You always do." The surgery lasted for hours. Outside, his wife waited anxiously, whispering prayers with every passing minute. When the doctor finally came out, he smiled and said, "It was successful. He's going to be okay." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you, God." When Daniel woke up days later, everything felt different. The steady rhythm of his new heartbeat filled the room like music. He couldn't explain it, but he felt peaceful, almost connected to something beyond himself. The doctor told him the heart came from a young donor who had passed away recently. The family wished to remain anonymous, but they were comforted knowing their loved one's heart had saved a life. Daniel closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are." His recovery was slow but steady. Each day he grew stronger, walking a little further down the hospital hallway, feeling life return to him. His wife and son visited often, bringing him laughter and warmth. But sometimes, late at night, he would feel a strange pull inside his chest, like the heart beating within him carried a story he hadn't heard yet. Months later, he was discharged and allowed to go home. The sun felt brighter, the air fresher. Everything seemed new again. But his perspective on life had changed completely. He no longer thought about schedules or destinations. He thought about moments. The laughter at breakfast, the sound of his son's footsteps, the way his wife smiled when she saw him walk without help. One afternoon, while organizing his things, he found the toy airplane again. He held it in his hand, staring at it with a quiet smile. That little girl's gift had stayed with him through everything. He didn't know where she was now, but he hoped she was happy and healthy. As he placed the toy back on the shelf, a strange feeling passed through him, like warmth spreading through his chest, as if the heart inside him recognized something familiar. He didn't know it then, but the same little girl who once handed him that toy was the very person who had given him the second chance to live. Her heart was now beating inside him, keeping his promise of protection alive in a way neither of them could have ever imagined. The miracle had already happened, it just hadn't revealed itself yet. Life after the transplant felt like waking up from a long, heavy dream. The world looked brighter, sounds felt clearer, and every heartbeat reminded Daniel that he had been given another chance. It wasn't easy at first. The pain from the surgery, the constant checkups, and the endless pills he had to take. But he didn't complain. He was alive, and that was enough for him. His wife watched over him like a guardian, making sure he ate well, rested, and followed every instruction. Their son would sit by his bedside, showing him drawings of airplanes, proudly saying, "When you get better, we'll fly together, okay?" Daniel would smile, touch his chest lightly, and reply, "Yes, we will." One day soon, weeks turned into months. His strength returned slowly. The doctors were amazed at how well his body accepted the new heart. "You're healing fast," they told him. But what they didn't know was that Daniel often felt something deeper, a strange connection inside him. It wasn't just a physical change. It was as if this heart carried a warmth of its own, a quiet energy that comforted him during lonely nights. Sometimes he would dream. In those dreams, he saw a little girl standing under a bright sky holding a small toy airplane. She never spoke, but she smiled at him, the same innocent smile that had once lit up a cabin full of fear. He always woke up with tears in his eyes, unable to explain why the image felt so real. One morning, Daniel decided to visit the hospital chapel. It was small and quiet, with sunlight streaming through the glass windows. He sat there for a long time, his hands folded. "Whoever gave me this heart," he whispered, "thank you. I don't know who you are, but I'll live the rest of my life honoring your gift." His voice trembled, but his heart felt light. He didn't know that destiny was already planning to answer his words. Months later, Daniel was invited to a ceremony honoring organ donors and recipients. The hospital wanted to celebrate people who had given or received the gift of life. His doctor encouraged him to attend. It might give you peace, he said. Daniel hesitated at first. He wasn't comfortable being the center of attention, but his wife insisted. You should go. Maybe you'll meet the people who made this miracle possible. The day of the ceremony was calm and sunny. Families filled the hall, holding photos of their loved ones who had donated organs. There were speeches, soft music, and stories that made everyone tear up. Daniel sat quietly in the back listening. Every word reminded him of how fragile and beautiful life was. When it was his turn to speak, he walked slowly to the stage, his voice steady but emotional. I don't know who my donor was, he said softly, but I know their heart beats inside me every day. Whoever they were, they've given me more than life, they've given me purpose. I want to live in a way that honors them. Every breath I take is a reminder of someone's kindness, someone's love. The room fell silent. Many wiped away tears. He finished by saying, We're all connected, sometimes in ways we can't even see. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared stories, Daniel stood by a window, looking out at the setting sun. That's when he heard a gentle voice behind him say, Captain. He turned around slowly and saw a woman standing there. She looked nervous but kind. There was something familiar about her eyes, though he couldn't place it at first. You don't know me, she said, but I think you knew my daughter. For a moment, time stood still. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Your daughter? He asked softly. The woman nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. Her name was Mia. She was on your flight that day. The one you saved. Daniel's heart stopped for a second. He stared at her, speechless. Mia, he whispered. The woman continued, her voice shaking. She was very sick. We tried everything, but her little heart couldn't keep up. She passed away a few months ago. She paused, taking a deep breath before adding, Her heart went to a man who needed it to live. We never knew who that person was. Until I saw your name on the ceremony list. Daniel's eyes filled instantly. His hands trembled as he looked at her. Her heart, he murmured, unable to finish. The woman nodded gently. Yes, you have her heart. Tears streamed down both their faces as silence fell between them. Neither could find words big enough for that moment. Finally, the woman said quietly, She always believed in you, you know. After the flight, she talked about you every day. She told everyone the pilot kept us safe. He's brave. I want to be like him. She even drew pictures of airplanes and said she'd fly one day. Her voice broke as she smiled sadly. I think, in some way she did. Daniel couldn't hold back anymore. He stepped forward and gently took her hands. I don't know what to say, he whispered. There are no words for something like this. The woman smiled through her tears. You don't have to say anything, just live. That's all she would have wanted. They stood there quietly, the sound of soft music echoing in the background. Daniel felt his heartbeat, her heartbeat strong and steady inside him. It was as if she was still there, reminding him that miracles didn't just happen in the sky. They happened on the ground too, in the hearts of people who cared for each other. Before leaving, the woman handed him an envelope. She wrote this before she passed. I think you should have it. Daniel took it with shaking hands. Later that night at home, he sat by the window and opened it slowly. Inside was a small note written in uneven handwriting. Thank you for saving us, Captain. You're my hero. Don't be sad. Keep flying even if it's not in the sky. I'll always be with you. At the bottom was a small drawing, a pilot and a little girl standing beside an airplane, both smiling. Tears ran down Daniel's face as he held the letter close to his chest. He didn't know how a child could have so much courage, so much love. He whispered her name softly. Mia, feeling the rhythm of her heart inside him. That moment changed him forever. From that day onward, Daniel lived differently. He started volunteering at hospitals, speaking to families waiting for transplants. He visited schools telling children about kindness and courage. He often said, sometimes the smallest heart can make the biggest difference. People listened to him not because he was a pilot or a hero, but because he spoke with a sincerity that came from a place of real experience. Every morning, he would stand outside and look up at the sky, feeling the wind on his face. He no longer missed flying because he realized he was already part of something much bigger than any airplane could carry. He had been given a second chance to live, and to love, to give, to inspire, and somewhere deep inside him he knew that little girl was still with him. Every heartbeat, every smile, every act of kindness carried her spirit forward. It wasn't just his heart anymore. It was theirs, beating together, reminding the world that sometimes miracles are not seen, they are felt. Time passed, but the story didn't fade. Daniel's life became a quiet example of how one act of kindness could ripple through the lives of many. He no longer wore his pilot's uniform, but everyone still called him Captain. To the world, he was the man who had survived against all odds. To his family, he was a husband and father who had been given back to them. But deep inside, Daniel carried something even greater, a promise to live for two hearts, not one. He often visited the park where children played, watching them laugh and run freely. Sometimes when he saw a little girl holding a toy airplane, his chest would ache, not in pain, but in remembrance. It felt like Mia was still there somewhere, smiling from a distance. He had kept her letter safely framed in his study, along with the drawing she made. Whenever he looked at it, he felt a calm strength, as if her spirit was guiding him. One afternoon, Daniel was invited by a local school to talk about courage and hope. At first, he didn't want to. He wasn't sure what to say that would truly matter to children. But his wife encouraged him. "You don't need a perfect speech," she said. "Just tell your story the way it happened. That's enough." So he agreed. When he arrived at the school, the students gathered in the hall, curious and excited. Daniel stood before them with a gentle smile. "I used to fly airplanes," he began. "I loved being in the sky. But one day I learned that the real flight isn't about airplanes, it's about hearts." The children listened closely, their eyes wide as he shared how life had tested him, how a young girl's courage had saved him. He didn't mention names, only feelings, the fear, the loss, the miracle. When he finished, the room was silent. Then a small boy raised his hand and asked, "Do you still miss the sky?" Daniel smiled softly. "Every day," he said. "But now I know that sometimes the best way to fly is to lift others up." The teachers clapped. The students smiled, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt peaceful. After that, he began speaking more often. Hospitals, schools, community events, wherever people needed hope, he went. He didn't ask for anything in return. He simply shared his journey, reminding everyone that life was fragile, but also full of grace. Slowly, his story began spreading. Newspapers wrote about him, and people sent letters thanking him for giving them strength. One letter stood out. It came from a father who wrote, "Your story helped my son agree to a heart transplant he was afraid of. He said, if the pilot can do it, I can too. You saved him." Daniel read that letter over and over, tears filling his eyes. It made him realize that maybe this was his new calling, not flying planes, but giving people hope. Years went by. Daniel's health stayed stable, though he never forgot to take his medicines or attend his checkups. He treated every day as a gift. On anniversaries, he would visit the donor wall at the hospital. He'd bring a small bunch of white flowers and stand quietly, eyes closed, whispering a silent thank you to Mia and her family. Her mother still kept in touch, and their bond had grown deeper over time. They didn't talk about loss anymore. They talked about life, about how her daughter's heart had not just kept beating, but had kept inspiring. One winter evening, Daniel received a call from a journalist making a short documentary about organ donation. They wanted him to share his experience on film. At first, he hesitated. He had always been humble about his story, never seeking attention. But then he thought of all the people who might find courage in hearing it. So he agreed. The filming took place in his home. The crew asked gentle questions while he sat near a window, the evening light falling softly across his face. He spoke with warmth and honesty. When they asked him what he had learned from everything he'd been through, he paused for a moment before answering. "I've learned that life isn't measured by how long we live, but by how much love we give while we're here. I was given another chance, not just to live, but to make a difference. And that's what I want to keep doing as long as this heart beats." The documentary was short but powerful. When it was released, thousands of people watched it online. Many shared their own stories of receiving or donating organs. Families wrote messages saying they had found hope again. Daniel didn't see himself as a hero, but he felt grateful that Mia's story had continued to touch lives through him. One afternoon, while taking a walk near the lake, Daniel saw a little girl sitting with her mother, folding paper airplanes. The girl looked up and smiled at him, holding one out. "Do you want to try?" she asked. He laughed and sat beside her. Together they folded another paper plane. When they threw it into the wind, it flew high, spinning and gliding gracefully before landing softly on the grass. The girl clapped and said, "You're good at this." Daniel smiled. "I've had a bit of practice," he said gently. As he watched the plane drift away, he thought about how life was like that. Fragile, unpredictable, but still beautiful if you let it soar. The wind carried the paper plane higher, and for a moment he felt as though Mia was watching too. That evening, he returned home and opened his journal. He wrote, "Today I threw a paper airplane. It reminded me that no matter how far we go, a part of us always stays with the ones we love. Maybe that's what flying really means, not leaving, but carrying hearts together." His wife read those words later and hugged him. "You've changed, you know," she said softly. "You used to chase the sky. Now the sky seems to chase you." Daniel smiled. Maybe it's just her way of saying hello. As years rolled on, Daniel grew older, his hair turning gray, his steps slower. But his spirit stayed young. He continued to visit schools and hospitals, always telling his story in the same simple, heartfelt way. People never got tired of hearing it. They said it reminded them that even in pain, there could be beauty, and even in loss there could be life. One day, as he stood in front of a group of medical students, he said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. "I used to believe that a pilot's job was to guide a plane through storms. But now I know that our real job in life is to guide each other through the storms we face. That's what keeps the world flying." After the talk, a young student came up to him with tears in her eyes. "My brother needs a transplant," she said quietly. "I was scared before, but hearing you gave me hope. Thank you." Daniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "Hope is like an airplane. It can't fly without someone believing it will." That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he placed a hand over his heart. He could still feel it beating strong and steady, the rhythm of two lives intertwined. He closed his eyes, and for a brief moment he saw the same dream again. A bright sky, a little girl, and a paper airplane soaring high. This time she waved, and he waved back, smiling peacefully. He knew then that everything had come full circle. He had kept his promise. He had lived for her, for himself, for everyone who had ever needed a reason to believe again. And as the stars shone quietly above, Daniel felt something deep and comforting. The feeling that even when his journey ended someday, his story, like that paper airplane, would keep flying forever.